Okay. All right. Thank you very much, Anne Kristen, and welcome to you all. Thank you for joining me for you this evening, for me this afternoon. And I'll tell you a little bit about myself and how I came to put this together. And my background is in cultural anthropology, and this is not related to any of the research I've done, but I've done a lot of teaching in higher education, and I've taught a whole range of courses, including intercultural communication, but largely in courses around social justice, gender, public policy, transition to work, and what have you. And so a lot of undergraduate students in a program that uh, I guess you might be, there's a lot of focus on applied learning. And in one of the classes, I think maybe it was just before the pandemic, we were in person. One student, I don't know what exactly what we're talking about, but the question was about empathy. And they asked, can you teach empathy? And there was and we had this whole debate, one of these organic things that can happen in person sometimes. And it stayed with me in the ensuing years to kind of explore this area in terms of, empathy now is getting even sort of more traction, but the whole idea is, can something like empathy, which you might describe as a skill or a competency, you might think of it as an innate human trait, or you might think of it as a cultural production. If you think about it, different cultures would have different kind of uh, emphasis on empathy as a value, but could it be something that could be taught? And then if it could be something that could be taught, one, how could that relate to intercultural understanding, especially as we seem to be, sort of caught in a world in which there is more disagreement, discord, polarization, and a pulling away rather than kind of bringing together. Certainly, I've noticed that in my own area, and I'm in Toronto, Canada. So could empathy be taught? Could it relate to intercultural understanding? And secondly, in terms of new technologies, I've just labeled these immersive technologies. Now, this is set up as a webinar, so it's still very 2D. So I'm not offering a 3D kind of exploration, although there'll be some simulations. So the keyword is simulation in terms of augmented reality, virtual reality. I began to explore different kinds of labs, if you want to call it that. We're developing training tools, simulation tools to help people experience uh, other people's realities. And so this kind of also kind of comes back to the idea of empathy or perspective taking, is that if you can maybe shift out of your own perspective and you can see how that could be an idea of ethnocentrism, an intercultural competence kind of concept, can you better appreciate? And so this is kind of the journey I've been on. As one of the things I've been exploring. So these are my session questions, and I will have questions at the end. But these are the things that I hope that the session will help answer. So I'm just checking the chat. Okay, you're just saying hellos. Okay. How can immersive technologies augment the objectives of intercultural competence training? And augment is a key word because there's been some discussion in another area which I'm interested in, which is called the future of work. And this whole idea of, if you think about more and more technologies, more and more robots, the fears of robotization and automation of human labor, how could we think of it a different way in which we work with technologies and such that maybe they increase, deepen, and then augment our own human capacities, if we think of empathy as something that is human? So that's where that word is coming from. How can immersive technologies facilitate experiences that deepen empathy and perspective taking? And the kind of key question, how can we explore immersive technologies to deepen our appreciation of the experience of an other? And I put O in capital of, certainly in anthropology, the whole idea of othering, otherness has been in the past a very large theme. I can imagine that perhaps you encounter this kind of theme of, us versus them in various kinds of conversations, and those could kind of get immersed in any kinds of discourses and arguments and discussions. So I've just left in general, but you can imagine different kinds of scenarios in which there could be different kinds of others, depending on your own perspective. Okay, so from what I see now, I'm more of a teacher, a little bit of a trainer, but more teaching in terms of intercultural competence. But this is what I've observed in terms of, kind of the key goals that we want to achieve as intercultural practitioners. Certainly the whole idea of just developing critical self-awareness, the idea that we come from a cultural perspective or cultural worldview based in ethnocentrism. How do we become aware of that ethnocentrism, which shapes our biases, and then often our generalizations of others, people different than we are. So that's one area. Another area is we might go into exploring different cultures, historical aspects of them, the kinds of geopolitical or social-cultural aspects that they're in, and we may learn other languages to deepen our appreciation. Okay, that's a second kind of goal, I would say. And then the third goal, I think, would be, if we're thinking about it a little bit, maybe more largely, what kinds of attitudes or skills or competencies, I'm not sure which is necessarily the right word, but would help develop this whole process. Like, if you don't have these skills, then all these other things are not going to really happen. So certainly curiosity, cognitive flexibility in terms of entertaining different kinds of ideas, being open to new perspectives, being more, able to deal with ambiguity. So not just, kind of a zero-sum kind of game or a black, white, yes, no, that kind of ideology or perspective. Certainly respect. And then I put in empathy as well. So this is what I sort of see as a kind of general thrust of intercultural competence training. And, my question is, a lot of the claims that we try to make is appeals to people's either it's through reason, like if you learn all of this, you will be able to see and appreciate how another language opens up a different vista, or if you learn about historical context, you might learn more about this group of people and their experience, that kind of thing. You might be able to, in terms of cognition, understand it, or it becomes like a moral argument. Certainly if we think about other areas, another area of interest includes all the efforts around, anti-oppression, anti-racism, diversity, equity, inclusion, and often it becomes a kind of a moral or normative argument that we should shift our norms to transform the way we have imagined society and its systems and structures. So my sense and my feeling is that can have some effectiveness, but it may not be as effective as we might like it to be. And so I wonder, okay, and this is the wonder, is how could these immersive technologies offer, something that taps into our sense of our senses, our experience, and our emotions to kind of augment, there's that word again, augment, through these use of technologies, intercultural understanding. So here's kind of the play, is that how can we sort of leverage these technologies to kind of augment what might be a human capacity of empathy, and in that way help deepen our intercultural understanding. So, okay, thank you. I'm glad to see everyone is able to use the chat now. So just a little bit more on augmentation, and then we'll try some of these journeys, if you will. I just have some videos to share. So in this source, I've put it over here, is if you look today with work, there's a risk of automation whereby, work that we have done, humans have done, becomes automated, or there's the issue of atomization where tasks get separated, you're only doing a small part of the task. That's been sort of an ongoing process. The idea is that becomes more routinized, predictable with fewer humans required as machines, algorithms learn how to, process information and do other tasks. And the idea of augmentation is that are there ways in which we can collaborate, if you will, with robots, machines, technologies to deepen our work experience and create new kinds of opportunities for humans? And the argument here is that more skilled humans are required, and often we have called these soft skills, but really they're actually very challenging to develop. And so, I and others use the term human skills. And then these are really the skills, many of which I just mentioned in terms of those competences. And here I've just put this idea of intercultural fluency, the ability to kind of shift through the sense of, not maybe completely, I won't say you can be completely unmoored maybe, but to move between different kinds of cultural boundaries, adaptability, empathy, curiosity are there. And for other kinds of things, creativity is also important. So that's sort of where the idea of augmentation is coming. So what I'd just like to do in the next little while is to kind of give you some examples that I have found in terms of VR and AR. Now, these are really 2D for the most, two-dimensional for the most part, because we don't have, headsets and fancy technologies on this webinar, but there are simulations. And I think that idea of simulations, of scenarios, immersing people in different situations from what they are used to is part of that learning. And this is where virtual reality or, even augmented reality, which is related, can be leveraged. So where I began, and one kind of film, and I won't put the whole film, it's sort of hyperlinked here, and I think you'll probably get the slide, but I can certainly cut and paste it in the chat if you'd like. Because it's an 11-minute film, it's quite long, but this film, which was a collaboration with the New York Times and another agency, kind of a digital agency, created this film about people's experience of living as refugees, of living with the devastation of war and violence. Now, these are, perennial themes. These are very, in many ways, widespread experiences. But again, we become desensitized quickly to these kinds of stories and vignettes. Even in a place such as where I live in Toronto, which receives a significant amount of asylum seekers and refugee claimants every year, and who are settled within our midst. What is my day-to-day relationship with these people? I mean, through other ways, we've tried to create some kinds of points of dialogue and convergence, but really, we often are in our own separate bubbles and worlds. So here, this idea is, how can we, actually experience it, obviously, and they're through the perspective of them. So we've got that idea of both empathy and perspective taking. Okay, and the question, so the virtual reality is fully virtual. The augmented reality, you're still playing in the real world, but it can be kind of superimposed, Pamela. So one example that I've seen is actually in my own community. I've seen artists doing this, whereby, and actually this also speaks to newcomers and refugees as well, is that there's a neighborhood near me where there are a lot of murals. Okay, so if you think of a mural, you may have neighborhoods where there are these lovely murals. And in fact, the idea of public art in the public realm, how can you engage, build community through art? Okay, and so again, this is a very 2D kind of thing. But what can happen is you can use an app on your phone. There's one called Large, Large, and the artist has created something at that spot of the mural or somewhere else. It could even be in another public space. And it might be another kind of digital reality. It could be a video. It could be this thing that's sort of floating in like hyperspace. And so the augmentation is, it doesn't replace the real, but it augments the real. Whereas in virtual reality, you are just immersed in not the real world at all. That's my understanding. Hope that helps. Okay, so this film kind of gets us started, but here, this will just start. This is BeAnotherLab, and they're based out of Barcelona, Spain. And if you do, want to check out their website, you can see at the bottom, they talk about empathy VR, so empathy virtual reality. But this shows you a little bit the mechanics of how they have ventured into, how one can, kind of embody the experience of another. And that's sort of this idea here. So I think this is short enough that I can play. You'll get a sense of it. Hopefully the sound is good.
The Machine to Be Another is a long-term research project combining cognitive science, virtual reality, and personal performances to create in users the perceptual illusion of being in the body of another. BeAnotherLab created this long-term project in seeking ways to better understand ourselves through understanding the other.
They come attack to our village, destroyed our village. Even my father is killed at the same time. We escaped from Darfur. When we get to Chad, UN only support the children and women. Men is not supporting at all. I stayed in Tel Aviv 6 years until you are not allowed to refugee. You must go back to Sudan. If you don't want to go back to Sudan, go to jail, you stay there.
An open book of embodied narratives, the installation allows users to see themselves behind the eyes of a human being rather than a virtual avatar. To perceive the other's body as their own, to move and interact within the space as the other does, to hear the other's voice and thoughts in response to their own actions.
If I could get this job, I wouldn't feel like the mice in the walls in my apartment were people I couldn't save anymore. America is drowning in the Rubicon, the lies it's created. I will not forgive you. And we don't say Iraq, and we don't say Afghanistan, and we just say we were over there. We don't have any names for the enemy. I guess the enemy then is just myself.
More than an installation, the Machine to Be Another is a system and open platform using embodied narratives, engaging with a community of researchers and creators. Cognitive science experiments have shown that embodied systems can be a powerful tool to reduce implicit racial bias, overcome phobias, and relieve pain. Can you imagine what could be done with embodied storytelling in future years?
Okay. Sorry. Okay, so I hope that gave you, that's sort of one example. And if you spend some time on the BeAnotherLab site, there are other examples as well. I just wanted to showcase one, but you can see that they are doing a bunch of things. There is certainly, they talk about the role of cognitive science. They are capturing data as well, qualitative and quantitative data as well. So it's kind of has that kind of laboratory experimental edge. They call these things performances. And so sometimes they could be on site specific, like we saw the example with the Sudanese refugee, in kind of the liminal space. And they are attentive to various different kinds of identities, whether they're cultural, social, political identities, seeking asylum, refuge, people living with disabilities. So, it can allow this idea of the embodiment. They talk about, empathy and mitigating racial bias, but you can see other kinds of biases could also be addressed in this process. And they mentioned storytelling and this idea of the sensory experience. I was captured by the slowness of it, which really kind of is interestingly juxtaposed with the quick cognitive shortcuts we make with our sort of quick judgments of everyday life, our bias. So it slows us down to engage in a different kind of way. So I think that is sort of its benefit. And remember, it's sort of an illusion that you're embodying another. Obviously, you're not, kind of transmigrating into another body. So it gives that perception, that illusion to yourself. I don't know what it is. Okay. Next is this one. Now, I'm going to just start it in a second. So this is a company called Axon. Now, this maybe is a little bit North American, so I'll explain a bit. Certainly in North America, we've had a kind of a growing problem whereby there's a lot of more public scrutiny around police action, the action of law enforcement. There have been growing I guess, calls to kind of become more accountable and transparent, and also be more sensitive to different kinds of communities that police are serving. And one of those communities that I guess has a heightened sense of risk of, deadly encounters between people and the police are people living with mental illness. And so this company, now Axon, is also a company that makes tasers, which, it helps, mobile, it's like a weapon to immobilize people, okay? But they've also developed a virtual reality training, which is based on creating a scenario to use as a kind of simulation training for officers. Something like schizophrenia is, of course, very hard to understand for someone who does not experience it or does not, have a member who lives with it, what have you. And so what's interesting about this is trying to look at, and the article here that links more about how we might develop better empathy, not just the general public, but also the officer, and trying to find out different solutions to any kind of problem, skirmish, what have you. And can there be alternate solutions, decision points made whereby they can use their discretion to choose communication, to choose de-escalation, that kind of thing, which might prevent, injury, violence, death. Okay, so this is how I'll play this as well. It takes a little bit to get started, but you can see it's like a training simulation.
Kevin wouldn't lie. He's my best friend, but I can disconnect it. I won't let them get in my head anymore. I can't just unplug the cable box. I need to unscrew the connection. I'm not stupid. I need to unscrew the connection. I need a screwdriver. You just have to find it. You always lose. Loser. Lost. 4,000 satellites in space. No one knows about them. Listen. You don't listen. No, listen. You don't listen! Listen! Maybe they don't know. The FBI makes YouTube take it down. They take the video down. They always take the video down, but someone always puts it up again. You just have to find it. You always lose. Loser. Lost. No, listen to me!
You just listen to me. I love you.
Listen. They need to know.
Who sent you here?
Maybe they don't know.
Who sent you here? Why are you here?
Hey, partner, weapons.
Are you working for them?
Get on the ground now! Get on the ground!
We have a mother calling for help. She says her son is schizophrenic and currently off his meds.
Hey, Diaz, can you cut the lights off?
Yeah. Hello, ma'am. Hello, ma'am. What's going on?
It's my son, Kyle.
Relax.
Okay,
What's going on?
Who sent you?
Oh,
Kyle,
hey,
just-
Kyle.
Why are you here?
Listen,
Why are you here?
Kyle, my name is Officer Morgan, okay? This is my partner, Officer Diaz. Hey, partner, he's got a screwdriver. He's holding a screwdriver in his hand.
No, she's
He's got a screwdriver. Kyle, listen. I want to talk to you, but I need you to put that screwdriver down first. Kyle, put that screwdriver down. Just toss it to the side for me, okay? All right, good. Thank you.
So I can disconnect it.
Kyle, hey, Kyle, can you come talk to me, please? Kyle, come talk to me. Sir, we're good. Thank you. Kyle, come talk to me.
Yeah. There are thousands of privately owned satellite companies, and if the citizens knew that the NSA and the tech companies were stealing the information, they're recording it, they're beaming it up.
Kyle,
and
I hear you. All right, Kyle, is it okay if we get you checked out tonight?
Okay.
All right, good. Mom, do you mind coming over real quick?
Yeah.
All right, Kyle, listen, the important thing to remember is you're not in any trouble. You haven't done anything wrong, okay? We just want you to be safe. You want everyone and your mom to be safe. We're going to call the ambulance, just have you go to the hospital and get checked out, and we'll just take it from there. All right? Does that sound all right?
Yeah. Okay.
Everything's okay, Kyle. You're doing a great job. The paramedics are here. These guys are professionals. They're going to take great care of you. And thank you for letting us help you tonight.
I just wanted to check. Sorry. Thank you for sharing the link, Elena. So I think that was interesting because you can see now how you could use it in an applied situation, like a training situation. Here, I've just given some context around mental health calls. That there's an increasing number, certainly in North America, who are calling police. That has to do with the fact, in some sense, that there's been a defunding of other kinds of services. Mental health, certainly in North America, is not well incorporated into healthcare systems. So people in crisis are forced to find other kinds of support, and it all as you can see in that situation, you kind of having to resort to calling the police. The police do get various kinds of training, but thus far, that kind of training has not necessarily been the most effective in what I guess is the most desirable approach, which is communication and de-escalation and the mitigation of the use of force. And there's lots of different kinds of reasons that I've just put here. Just generally in society, police are members of our own society. They also are raised with the same kind of culture that has long stigmatized mental health issues as opposed to other kinds of health issues. And there's various kinds of social determinants that connect with mental health. Certainly homelessness is another one. So you can see that if we think about, police and becoming more responsive to the communities they serve, especially those who are most marginalized, whose experience may be less known or harder to understand, there's a possibility that these kind of simulations or scenarios can at least sensitize them to what they might experience and sort of better equip them sort of mentally and emotionally to try something else. And so if you saw with that simulation training, there are different options. Interestingly, the other one besides schizophrenia was autism, which is another area of complex care. Both of these, they're not just like one size fits all. So obviously it's, the simulations are limited. They're probably pulling at generalities rather than specifics, but I suppose it's a beginning of a start. Okay. Thank you, Elena. Yes. Escalating. Yeah, right. To avoid that kind of escalation. So even you can see the tone of the voice. I mean, these, the verbal and nonverbal cues and what have you. You can see how this could be applied to different kinds of intercultural scenarios as well. Okay, so there's, I think, one more I wanted to show you, just a little bit more about the idea that I've just discussed, this idea of the scenario-based. So you can see how it can be a valuable training tool, allows for different playouts. And rather than saying, choosing a punitive approach, and even in saying, oh, well, this is the wrong approach, it's for the learner, for the trainee, if you will. It offers, kind of a pause reflection, also the sense of, what could they do differently? What can maybe yield a different kind of result. So I think it brings in both areas of both. They're kind of getting immersed into the scenario. They might be, if you kind of heighten the technology, get a sense of embodiment. In the beginning, you heard the kind of cacophony of sound to kind of simulate what could be going on in a person experiencing schizophrenia without medication. And so that is not something that is easily accessible to an officer or just anybody. And so the idea of even kind of appreciating that beyond just reading kind of a clinical description of schizophrenia. So this goes back to the kind of difference between the cognitive and the moral, which might say we should do this, we should do that, versus kind of experiencing it and learning from that kind of immersion to do something differently. So this last one, again, this is from Stanford University, and this has to do with trying to build empathy around anti-Black racism, as you can imagine. An ongoing story, certainly in the United States and elsewhere, but it certainly has accelerated in the last few years with the murder of George Floyd. And then this project has been developing, but what's interesting is that it isn't just sort of one thing. It's this whole idea of a journey. And it's interesting, the 1,000 Cuts, trying to showcase the whole life experience. Again, hard to understand, just sort of cognitively. We can appreciate some aspects of it, but tries to immerse the person to play a role named Michael Sterling, and go through Michael's life as a child and what kinds of things happen in school, to a teenager with encounters with the police, and then entering the job market as a young adult. Now, unfortunately, you would have to download it and have the software to actually view it. And there is a trailer, which is not very useful. But what I did find was a 2D version, and I'm not going to play the whole thing, but I wanted to play the first narrative of the classroom when Michael is small. And I think the idea of the 1,000 Cuts, there's that phrase, death by 1,000 cuts, the kind of a creative nature of this kind of the harm of everyday things that might seem innocuous to an outsider, but what's the impact on the person? So here, the kind of focus shifts on trying to immerse ourselves, maybe even experience what we might, others might experience, but we may not actually have to. So I'll just give you a little bit of here.
Welcome to 1,000 Cut Journey. My name is Dr. Courtney Cogburn, and I'm a professor at Columbia University, where I study racism and its effects on health. The experience you're about to go through was created using empirical data regarding disciplinary practices in the classroom, workplace discrimination, as well as policing practices in cities such as New York. We've also drawn from personal anecdotes that have been shared with us regarding experiences of racism.
Look at your reflection in the mirror. Take one step closer and examine your new body. Wave to yourself. You've now become Michael Sterling. Your friends call you Mike. You are 6 years old and in the first grade. Look down at the ground. Please take a seat on the floor where indicated. You will now be transported to your first grade class. Stay seated, but take a few moments to look around the classroom.
Miss Morris, can you help me?
Yeah, what do you need help with?
Did I do this right?
Looks good.
Are you using this block?
No, you can have it. What are you making?
I'm making a Minecraft dungeon. It can't be blown.
Cool.
I'm making a creeper/robot. It is dynamite, and it can blow up your dungeon, Travis.
Well, I'm making a robot, and it can spit fireballs, and you have to admit, that's pretty cool. You should make a fireball, Mike.
Mike is a black fireball. Ah, run from the scary black fireball. Yours would be the scariest because yours is black, and black is always the scariest. Creeper attack! Ah! fireball, Mike. Make the scary black fireball.
Okay. So I'll just pause it there. I mean, you could see it further, but you can see already like what it's immersing inside, sort of giving you a story, is a sense of, you know, first grade, grade one, 6-year-old, what they might experience, what Michael is experiencing. You can see kind of the separation from the other children and the ways in which we might describe now as kind of like a, you know, even maybe like a microaggression, if you will. And if we think about that back to the Thousand Cuts, how that then plays out and intensifies over the course of his life. And that's sort of the, I would say, the point of the this project of immersion and building that sense of empathy. So the last bit, and the only reason this is here was that I think it was in the original description of the webinar, and so I thought I'd better say something about it. I have not done, you know, virtual reality or augmented reality myself, you know, beyond these kinds of explorations. But something that I have done in terms of a collaboration is, you know, because I do a lot of instruction, I do a lot of curriculum development, and I was supporting this project. Strangely enough, as a DEI advisor, so it's sort of this ad hoc thing. It's an open source course in the province of Ontario, but I mean, I think you're able, it's Creative Commons, anyone could use it. It's meant to build sort of entrepreneurial mindset or thinking, but in a more expansive way, because it's connecting with, if you can see in the scenario, with issues around climate change, as well as trying to how the idea of managing complexity, what kinds of competencies. So if you go back to the idea when I showed you about augmentation, the idea there's more complex skills, more ambiguous skills. So some of those skills like, you know, cognitive flexibility, tolerance for ambiguity, curiosity, openness, these are all valuable sort of human skills that even this project is trying to build. It incorporates systems and futures thinking, so different kinds of other kinds of ways of thinking about the future. And I sort of try to bring in sort of a deeper kind of appreciation of diversity, equity, inclusion, and intercultural and global competence to the project. There is the ways in which it connects with the VR and the AR is that there's elements of storytelling, of immersion, of gamification, and there is also even a cooperative board game. So again, it's trying to get, you know, trying to transform learning beyond just the kind of the cognitive and the rational to something that's more experiential and immersive. And so I wanted to share that with you. And so now I think I want to move towards some questions, and I'm just going to put these in the chat. Maybe we'll start with the first one. Oh, there's a lot. I'll read the comments as well. The first question I've put, what are your thoughts on using AR, VR, and other immersive technologies to augment human competencies such as empathy, perspective taking, and intercultural understanding? So do you have any thoughts on that? Okay, Inna has written, as soon as the cost of production goes down, it becomes easier to create. This is the future of learning. Okay, thank you. It seems to align with the idea of putting yourself in someone else's shoes as close as you can. Thank you, Pamela. Which is interesting, you use that, you know, that phrasing, and I think we say that, and yet we often don't do it, right? So this kind of is like a nudge, if you will, or an opportunity to try that out. Elena has written, I worked on a government agency project doing just that for intercultural competence about 8 years ago. Huge fan, lots of possibilities. So that's exciting. It would be great to hear more about that, Elena. Okay, and I'll put in the other question as well. And this question is, can such immersive experiences combat dominant media cultural narratives that repeatedly reproduce systemic inequities and us versus them dynamics, such as racism, xenophobia, ableism, sexism, etc.? Pamela has added, there's a company in France called Virtual Academy that is using VR for a number of training topics. Thank you, Pamela. That might be an interesting resource. Sujata had written, sorry, but too late. I think that the police empathy training was excellent, an incredible opportunity to change one's perspective. Thank you, Sujata. I think that idea of changing one's perspective is the real kind of possibility. And it might even, even for, practitioners such as yourselves to sort of immerse in that opportunity to even think about, as Pamela suggested, there's some using virtual reality for training. And Elaine has talked about a project with a government agency. How could that become more generalized, building on in this concept of the technology becoming cheaper, across, different kinds of boundaries, how that might make different other kinds of experiences more accessible and help build, I guess, maybe the potential for greater forms of communication and collaboration. And Vinita has written, lots of potential question. Wouldn't a certain degree of repeated exposure be necessary to sustain the effect? Oh, that's a really interesting question. Just building on what Sujata mentioned with the police empathy training, I think I can see there you probably would have to repeat it. You would probably have to refresh, because what happens in everyday life is often that desensitization, kind of pulling away from reality, the bubble effect. And so that idea that to kind of re-immerse yourself periodically would be, probably very valuable. VR can allow us to take on new worldviews, from Elena. That's interesting, because that's the idea of, if we think about, those models of intercultural competence, and can you go from, from the kind of where you're just in your own worldview to where you are kind of taking on multiple worldviews, maybe virtual reality can help us achieve that as well, for the good or the bad, to better appreciation. And then potentially, if you think about, Elena, the idea that could public policy be shifted because of the learning? And we still have a few minutes. If there's any more comments or any questions, I'm happy to entertain them. Okay. Okay, I'm not seeing anything. So maybe I'll just move and say thank you very much for sort of going on this journey with me. I put in my contact information, email, LinkedIn, and my website if you'd like to connect or stay in touch. It'd be a pleasure. Some of you, obviously, I know, but I'd love to know others. And thank you to SIETAR Europa for inviting me to put together this webinar and to present it. So thank you very much, and Kristen and Julia.
Well, thank you very much, Nitin. It was very interesting, even though I arrived a bit later, the joys of driving. But thank you. That was awfully interesting. Empathy is such an important skill for all of us, and in every profession, as you mentioned, such a necessity to develop. If nobody has got any other questions, I would like really to thank you for being here, and hopefully it will not be the last time, Nitin.
I hope not. I mean, it's I hope one day I can come join you in one of your in-person events in the future as well.
Okay, fantastic.
Okay,
so
thank you very much.
Thank you very much, everybody. Nitin, could you stay a bit longer?
Sure, I can. Thank you, everyone. Thanks very much, everyone. Have a good evening. Bye-bye.